my name's Monica Fredesky, and I am your South Central Math Core Consultant. Um, I am going to share my screen and we'll go through this PowerPoint to familiarize ourselves with how to use the math instructional practice guide. However, I want to encourage you to add any questions, comments, noticings, ideas. Feel free to drop those things in the chat. Michael has agreed to monitor that for me, and so we can address any of your questions, concerns. Also, I would like to encourage you to unmute yourself at any time. You can stop, interrupt things, and ask whatever questions you have. All right, so I'm going to start out with sharing my screen and putting it in presentation mode. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So I'm Monica Fredesky. My email contact is monica.fredesky@tn.gov. You can just call me Monica. Okay. So our agenda today is to give you an overview of the math IPG and how to implement this in a way that supports teachers instead of evaluates teachers. So again, this is a broad overview. We're not going to dig deeply into each of the indicators, but hopefully we'll be able to provide you with enough information to make this a useful tool for you. This quote is from Jim Knight. Some of you may be familiar with them, especially if you've had any experience with instructional coaching. Jim Knight is I would call him one of the founding fathers of instructional coaching. One of his famous quotes is, "When teachers stop learning, so do students." Now, the reason we felt like this would be a really impactful statement to start out with is that the math IPG, or actually not just the math IPG, but the ELA IPG as well, the purpose is for this to be a tool that helps build a culture of continuous learning, not just for teachers, but for students also. So the IPG frames or positions the teacher, and any educator involved as an investigator, a professional who is investigating their practice and refining their craft for increasing efficacy. So we want to model this as educators. We want to model this mindset that is driven to never stop learning. We want to model that for our students so that our students can mirror that. So let's look at what is the purpose for using the math IPG? I know Michael has in a prior email attached the math IPG in a prior email. If you'd like to hunt that down, locate it, and print it off, you may want to use that to take notes.
I've also just put it as a link in the chat too.
Perfect.
So everybody has that.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so what is the purpose of using the math IPG? Well, if you recall in some prior sessions or in a prior session, you've been introduced to two IPGs for ELA. One is the foundational skills for grades pre-K through 2, and then the other is building knowledge IPG that's used for pre-K through 12. So this overview of the math IPG, I want you to note that there is just one IPG for math, and it can be used for grades K through 12. So it's important to use the instructional practice guides for multiple reasons. And one of the reasons is to norm on indicators for what strong instructional practice looks like in the math classroom. Another way is to use it as a monitoring tool, not an evaluative, but monitoring tool to just glean some go and see look fors. What are some areas of strength and what are some areas for growth? And then you use that information, that those observations to give quality, timely, and content specific feedback to your teachers so that it can provide um, quality guidance for them to improve their instruction and therefore improve student learning. And then another way to use the IPG, and we'll talk about this on a later slide a little more, is that it seamlessly connects to the intellectual prep cycle. So unit lesson prep cycles. That includes also student work analysis. And we'll look at that a little deeper on a future slide. Okay, so as you learned earlier this year, the Tennessee Department of Education has two tools to support the vision of strong literacy instruction. So although the two tools, the ELA and the math, they're slightly different, but each of the IPGs mirror one another in their focus. The focuses are the culture of learning, using high quality instructional materials, teacher actions, teacher moves, and student practices or student actions. So today we're just going to look at the an overview of that. We're not going to go through every single indicator, but this is going to hopefully help you get a strong sense of what strong math instruction looks like, so you can recognize it in your classrooms. So here's a brief overview, just a real quick one snapshot overview of each of the components in the Math IPG. The very first one is the culture of learning. Now, that's a really important one, and honestly, the rest of the IPG, the core action 1, 2, and 3, should all be framed or grounded in. I think I like the word grounded in the culture of learning. So essentially first, you check that kids are actually doing what's being asked of them. But then you also need to check that what's being asked of them is appropriate, aligned to the standards grade level. Is the content, the materials that they're using, are they grade level appropriate? Are the tasks that they're solving or working on in their math classrooms appropriately challenging? Are they aligned to the standards and the level of, or the aspect of rigor that's called out by the standard? But finally, are the students doing the majority of the thinking in class? We want the students to be carrying the cognitive load instead of just having the teacher sage on the stage type instruction. So essentially, we have the culture of learning, all is grounded in culture of learning. Core action 1 is the 3 math instructional shifts: focus, coherence, and rigor. Core action 2 are teachers' strategies, the math teaching practices. And core action 3 are those student practices, those 8 math student practices. So let's look at the culture of learning. So the essential question, that is the big question for culture of learning, is there a classroom culture where student agency, mathematical identity, and belonging contribute to students' mathematical success. One of the things I like to start out with whenever I'm introducing the Math IPG to instructional leaders is think back to your days as a student of mathematics. In that classroom, when you were learning math, did you feel a sense of belonging? Or did you feel like you came into that classroom to merely perform? And that and did you get a sense of developing your identity as a doer and learner of mathematics? Sometimes the answer to that is no. Personal experiences as learners of mathematics, we've given some misinformation that math is not for everybody, which is just a false claim. So, this is where teacher belief or educators' belief is a big part of the culture of learning. The big question here is also, does everybody really believe that that all students can do math? Now, that may be a very that's an opening up of a big dialogue for personal reflection, but this is the essence of the culture of learning. It's not just culture is a little different, but it is included in learning environments. So this is just focusing in on, is the culture of learning um, conducive to contributing to students' mathematical identities and agency. So I want to give you a minute. I'm going to monitor my time. I'm going to give you a minute to read through those indicators. And if you would like to please make note of anything that stands out to you. Okay. Hopefully that was enough time for you to read through those. Is there anything that anybody would like to come off mute or drop in the chat that stands out that you'd like some clarity around, possibly?
So we've gotten some answers in the chat. Indicators look at what the students are doing and how they are engaging in the lesson rather than just complying. The focus on students, their actions, engagement, their experiences, and intentional use of time, and demonstration of joy of learning through positive relationships are things that all
Ooh,
stuck out to them.
positive relationships. Yes.
I notice how things should be positive, engage, and the culture.
Yeah. So here's some things that you might hear that would indicate that there's a need for improvement in the culture of learning. Sometimes that's easier to identify than this elusive joy for learning mathematics. Um, so it's almost easier to describe what it does not look like than what it does look like, especially starting out. Um, So there would not be a culture of developing students' positive mathematical identities if it is not expected that all students contribute or are engaged in the conversations in the math dialogue in the classroom, or expectations are different for different students. Expectations of engagement. I want to say that first. Um, or that, oh, this is hard. I've heard I've heard that being mentioned. Um, this is hard, and there's a negative connotation to the difficulty of what the content is of the lesson. Sometimes we could frame this is hard in a way that's a more positive connotation. Like I we want to encourage um, stretching our understanding and challenging each other. Otherwise, there's no learning, no real learning and growth happening. Okay. So let's look at core action 1. These are the 3 mathematical instructional shifts: focus, coherence, and rigor. So if you look at core action 1A, focus. The focus is on the standards, the Tennessee standards, or the parts thereof for that time of year. So for this, you may want to have access to the Tennessee math standards. And one of the great tools that we have, and we're going to look at those a little closer soon, the great tools that we have in mathematics are the instructional focus documents. Actually, that's the next slide we're going to look at, so I won't go over that just yet. So part A is focus. Part B is coherence. This is one of the reasons high quality instructional materials has been so important and so pivotal to mathematics education, because these materials are designed to connect developing ideas in mathematics, connections, developing ideas in the current year, even the current unit, and prior years, and building on those for future lessons and future years, instead of the opposite of that is teaching and learning math concepts in isolation. We want students to see this beautiful connection between all of these math concepts as all of mathematics. And then, of course, there's that core action 1C. The focus of that is rigor, those 3 aspects of rigor: conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and application. Let's see. Just want to make sure. So, one thing to note here that I think is really important, just having the materials out, the HQIM, just having them out and open is not an automatic yes to all of these indicators. So the big thing that's being addressed here in core action 1 is, are the materials being leveraged as designed? Are they being leveraged as designed to focus on the standards, to ensure coherence, and address the aspects of rigor? So one of the questions that I think I would ask first before doing any walks with a principal is to ask, do you have access to your HQIM for math? If not, that may be something that you want to inquire about, getting access either to a digital platform so that you can become more familiar with and reference the materials, what's happening in the lessons, either before or during or after you do the walks. Okay. So this is the math instructional focus documents, or the IFDs, because we love acronyms. We love abbreviations, don't we? So the math IFDs serve as an excellent resource for both teachers and leaders in understanding the focus and the intent of the Tennessee math standards. You can find those on the Best for All Central by grade or course. So these have been out for quite some time. One of the things that was added to these just recently or this year, or maybe it was the end of last year, I'm not exactly sure, but one of the things that was added is that little section just below the standard that says aspect of rigor alignment. So each and every standard, grades K through 12, um, will include which aspect or aspects of rigor are being addressed or being emphasized in each standard. You also have those levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 of evidence of learning statements. These are just kind of narratives that say this is what students would likely be able to do at this level. I want you to focus in on what it's saying in level 3. That is grade level. Grade level learning is always in level 3. Then you down below have the instructional focus. So if I want my students to reach that level 3 of grade level understanding, then where should I focus my instruction? The narrative below level 3 shows or describes where instruction should focus if you want to reach level 3. Then below that, which it doesn't show on this slide because it would be probably on the other page, on a second page, is level 4 instruction. If I want my students to master and really be ready for the next um, uh, thing that's coming, then where should I focus my instruction for reaching a level 4 of understanding? So if anyone would like to come off mute and share with us maybe a way that you have been able to utilize the instructional focus documents, maybe your instructional coaches or your teacher leaders, is there some innovative way that you've been able to utilize these documents? Trying to practice wait time. I'm not so great at it, but I will let Michael monitor the chats. So we're still talking about instructional focus documents that can be found on Best for All Central. Um, a lot of some people who've shared with me their experiences in using the IFDs is they like to either download them onto their iPad or their laptop, or even their phone, so that they can take them with them as they do their math IPG walks. Um, Personally, if I was going to download them onto something, the one at the bottom that's circled in red that says combined, if you download the one that says combined onto your device, then it makes it much easier to find what you're looking for because you can use the Control F to search for key terms.
So I just got a statement here in the chat. It says, we have used them in PLCs to look at the rigor of our student work. And another one says, we have used the IFDs during our walkthroughs and during our PLC meetings.
Okay, I love that. Of course, I mean, so I'm, using them for the walkthroughs and PLCs to give feedback or to just, whatever. But I love that idea of using the IFDs to monitor or evaluate the level of rigor from student work. So here's where we're starting to see the utility of these documents in doing student work analysis, in doing an assessment analysis, even. Do the questions on our assessments, whether that be an end of a unit assessment or a common formative assessment, exit ticket, whatever it may be, do those questions align to the appropriate level of understanding? Do they align? Am I addressing, do I have enough questions that align to grade level, level 3, level 4? I want to sprinkle some level 4s in there as well. So thanks for sharing. Okay, so let's look at core action 2, sorry, core action 2. So again, core action 2 is teacher math practices. So, NCTM, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, has listed 8 teaching math practices, math teaching practices, MTPs, I guess is what they're called. So these directly align or call out all 8 of those practices in A, B, C, and D. As you read through core action 2, we want to just hone in on the intentionality of the teacher moves around questions and tasks. We're looking at instructional strategies, but the big picture here is you're looking to see if the teacher or how the teacher is using their materials in a way that allows all students the opportunity to interact and explore math. Um, here's some key words to note or highlight in core action 2. All students, variety, multiple, student work, and adjustments. In other words, this core action is chocked full of formative assessment moments that allows the teacher to know if her students are with them, staying with them, and which specific strengths and bright spots or misconceptions might be surfacing. So strong evidence. So how will I know if I'm seeing evidence of core action 2? Some strong evidence of core action 2, particularly if we can look at core action 2D. Here's what that might look like. In this classroom, teachers are prompting students to talk to one another about what they're learning. So this is discourse that is in the classroom that's not just teacher-student exchange, but it's student-to-student exchange. Here's the good thing. Your Math HQIM, your materials, are designed with intentional questioning sequences that support teachers in creating these types of learning environments. So here's another reason why it's important to be familiar with your instructional materials for math. So if you review the margins of the teacher's edition, this gives you a place to point teachers in the direction of what questions should I be asking? What types of, and in what sequence should I be asking these questions? Because we don't want to reveal too much too soon, and we don't want to withhold things or withhold thinking or opportunities from students because we think they may not be able to do it yet. Okay. Just my little note for you. I'll pause for a second. If you look through those, I'll go back. Let me go back to a slide here. I'll pause for just a moment and let you look through those and jot down anything that stands out or any questions you might like to have more clarity on. I'll give you a minute to do that. All right, Michael, you'll let me know if anything pops up in the chat. And we'll move on to core action 3. So again, core action 3 are those the incorporate the 8 math student practices. These are the things that students who are doing and learning mathematics do. These are the things they do. Now, I want to point out that there is an inherent connection between the teacher moves and the subsequent impact that those moves have on the student practices. So it's the teacher moves that influence or allow those student practices to happen. So you'll notice that in A, B, C, D, and E, that all of those things, those statements start out with the teacher, the teacher, the teacher. So those statements are the teacher does this thing so that the next part of the statement is the students are blah 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 blah. So at the heart of core action 3, we want to see that all students have the opportunity to do the mathematical thinking within the lesson. Remember, this is key. Math is not a performance subject. It is a thinking subject. We don't see students thinking. You cannot see that happening, and you can see what's happening inside their brains. But what you can look for is evidence that there are opportunities for students to think. The evidence that we might see is students asking questions for clarification. They may not be asking the teacher to clarify. They may be asking each other to clarify their thinking. They might be processing their thinking by just thinking out loud. And that's a fantastic way for not just students to clarify their thinking or to share their thinking, but it's a fantastic way for teachers to listen for the things or listen for evidence of what students are thinking as well.
We got a comment in the chat back
Okay.
to core action 2. It says the statement that pops out to me: teacher provides feedback and adjusts the lesson. This shows that the teacher is teaching for mastery instead of teaching to teach.
Very good. So provides feedback and adjusts the lesson. Yes, I like that. So here's and this is a perfect connection to what we were just saying. That's one of the things that teachers will do so that students can do the whatever it is in the math student practices. So providing feedback means that teachers are listening and paying attention to how the students are responding to the lesson, and using that information to adjust sometimes. And look at D. D kind of builds on C, where it says that the teacher is using internal pauses to ensure that everybody, are you all with me? But it's more than just saying, hey, is everybody here with me? Or we all understand? Do you get it? It's listening for statements that students are making or struggles that students are having, to pause at that moment and say, where are we? Why is this? Who is struggling? And what is the struggle? Because that's worthy of investigation. Okay. So back to core action 3, we talked about student opportunities. Okay, yes. So I was saying something about math is not a performance subject, although correct answers are valuable, and that's what we want. But mathematics as a whole, in its nature, is a thinking subject. So what we're wanting to do in mathematics is to help students realize that mathematics is a tool to help them with problem solving, using their rationalization skills to solve complex problems. So their discussion in their class need to go beyond just stating answers. So that kind of rapid exchange of what's the answer? Yes, now move on. That's not the kind of discourse. I mean, there's a place for that, but that's not mathematical discourse. That's performance. That's give me the answer. Thank you. I'm moving on. So we can always tell when the norms of the classroom are supporting core action students in doing core action 3 is that when this teacher asks or poses certain questions, she's not looking for an answer, not one answer. There could be a variety of explanations, answers, justifications, and things. Okay, let's move on to supporting all students. And I think this is really this is a list. It is not an exhaustive list, of course, but these are some ideas of things that you might look for or expect to see when you're observing and doing math learning walks. We want to make sure that some of the things that we're looking for are things that effectively support students with disabilities, English language learners, economically disadvantaged, all students that may need support or need additional or extension even. So the goal in looking for certain actions is that we want to encourage students to take ownership of their own learning. So remember that these supports are not provided for every single student, but for those who may need temporary support or access to grade level tasks. So since you're going to be getting this PowerPoint later, I will not read to you every bullet point here. You are welcome. Okay, so let's make some connections to the IPG and to intellectual prep. So intellectual prep, collaborative prep, lesson internalization, unit lesson prep, whichever one of those things you call it. This is more than just a plan. This is more than a lesson plan. This requires some intellectual preparation. Am I ready to teach this lesson? Um, so the greatest lessons usually are connected to some solid lesson prep. So let's take a look at how core action 2 is connected to intellectual prep. Keeping in mind that leaders can and must help teachers know and understand the intellectual preparation process. So let's look at that statement in column 1. This is from core action 2. The teacher uses a variety of explanations, representations, tasks, examples, and or instructional techniques to make the mathematics of the lesson explicit. So, what do teachers need to prepare for this core action in practice? Let's look. In this second column to the right, is taken directly from the lesson preparation guide, the math lesson prep. So there is a requirement of some pre-work. What is that pre-work? Know what the mathematical goal of the lesson is. What standard is that aligning to? What's the big idea of the lesson? It's also important, I think, to complete the tasks, the things that you're asking students to do. Now, I will say this, that in lesson prep, this could be a discussion between multiple teachers, a teacher and a coach, a teacher and a special education teacher, a core content teacher and a SPED teacher, um, so that they can have of what is it that the students are going to need access to so that they can experience success in solving the tasks and the problems that we're going to put in front of them. Anticipating where the students might struggle. A lot of, again, I would refer you to the margins in the teacher's edition, in those materials. A lot of times in our HQIM, or well, not a lot of times, pretty much every time so far that I've looked, um, the HQIM has in there, here's the questions that you can ask to clarify. Here are some questions that you can ask if students are struggling with this particular problem. This could be a misunderstanding. This is also a place where the instructional focus documents, where is my, what ability or capacity are my students giving me as evidence? And how can I analyze that so that I can decide which questions to ask so that this struggle moves from unproductive to productive? Okay. If you have any questions, comments, need clarification on anything, feel free to come off mute or drop it in the chat. All right. So here's some things that we need to know and be prepared for before we even walk. So here's how you would, some things that you might do before you actually implement math learning walks. So there's, sorry, just missed that. So there's a one key thing, if I could just say one big thing that I would recommend is if you have access to the materials and you know what lesson you're going to be observing, review some of that lesson, review some of the materials and the instructional focus documents that's going to that addresses the standard that you're going to observe, so that you can know what is the as intended, that from core action 1. Are the standards being addressed and the materials being implemented as the materials intend? So you can't know that unless you've previewed some of those materials. So identify what the big understandings are and how that lesson fits into the unit. So these are some questions, again, that you may want to keep in mind or have in your pocket so that the feedback and debrief after you've done some walks can spark some quality discussion. So what might we expect to see before we go into the classroom? What standards are being addressed? What's the aspect of rigor? Again, you can get that from the IFD, but also in all of the materials that I've reviewed or that I've been a part of doing walks in, the materials themselves say this lesson will address this aspect of rigor, and this lesson will address these student practices even. Okay. So then during the walks, during the learning walks, you'll take note of what you see, jot down some of your wonderings and questions you might have about the lesson, and connect your questions and noticings to the IPG indicators. So these notes are really beneficial whenever it's time to debrief with your learning walk team and your teacher so that they can get um, quality feedback and or be left with something to think about. Um, I know that a lot of people, typically we tend to be creatures of habit and we prefer pen and paper or we prefer digital. So if you're using something, if you're using a digital recording form, then you might want to include in there some space just for comments. Um, this is something that I saw. Now, personally, I like to have both because, well, I like to have both mostly because I like to draw pictures on the back of my IPG. And I don't mean like doodle pictures, but like draw the pictures of things that I saw students using to model their math thinking, or pictures of something I can capture from the overhead projector or the board. This was the diagram, or this was the schematic model of whatever math concept the lesson was addressing. Okay. And then now, after walks, once the walk is over and you're debriefing with your team, this can look different in based on the number of classrooms that you've walked in or the time that you have in between classrooms that you're doing walks in. So, for example, if you're walking, let's say you visit 3 first grade classrooms, you may want to debrief with your team after each of the classroom visits and talk to each other about not just pacing, were they teaching the same lesson, but how were those lessons being interpreted by the students? What did you hear from students or see students doing as a result of that lesson in first grade, in one grade level? Um, let's see. So, also part of the debrief after you've walked, have you can have a discussion with your team or with your teachers, your coaches, whoever it might be, on what are some actionable next steps. We have some documentation, some documents that have some ideas of what principal feedback might be for teachers in math, but also that is also something that you can refer to the again your HQIM, the teacher's edition, the margin of the teacher's edition, but also the instructional focus documents. You get more information or more specific with your feedback for teachers. How does intellectual prep impact and drive high academic expectations, core actions? Now, that's not just a hypothetical question that I'm throwing out there to you, but it is a question that should continuously be revisited because this is a cycle, right? So when I've done the walks and I've debriefed with my team and I've come up with some actionable steps for improvement, that should inform what we're doing during our collaborative prep. It should be directly related to the feedback and to the observations that were previously made. Because that's useful for, I mean, that's it's useful for teachers. Okay, so here are some ideas on how the IPG can be used in different roles. And I know that I'm running out of time. Um, so if you notice that the first and the last uh, row, sorry, the first and the last row is not marked for teacher. So providing feedback to the teacher or a teacher candidate, of course, that's not the teacher's role. reflection is the teacher's role, but not providing themselves feedback. And then, of course, planning professional learning opportunities using the IPG, using those indicators in the IPG. And I'll let you read those when you get access to the slides, so you're not listening to me read them to you. Okay, so here's where we are going to wrap up. I would like for you to, if you have any questions whatsoever, either come off mute or drop them in the chat. And I can reach out. You can also reach out to me personally, which I'm going to share my email address with you on this very final slide. But before we finish up, there are some implementation supports that I'd like to share with you. There is an intellectual prep hub that is on Best for All Central. And this is a place where like all of the things that help support implementing good collaborative prep is housed there. And then, of course, there's the Math Standards resource page also on Best for All Central. This Acceleration for All network is highlighted in yellow. I know that's something that's happening right now with ELA and SPED, but that will be coming for mathematics and SPED as well. Another thing that's coming soon is the Math Implementation Network. I know many of you might be familiar with the Literacy Implementation Network. This will not be exactly the same, not exactly the same, but it will be somewhat similar to that, to the LIN. But instead it will be the MIN. I don't know how MIN, it sounds like I'm saying men. Okay. Leaving you with one final